Everyone in the royal court believed the girl smelled like death, until death itself knelt behind her. She stood barefoot on the black marble floor of the throne hall, her torn gray dress stained with ash, her hands dark from the burial pits, while the nobles covered their noses and whispered the name they had given her since childhood. Grave Girl. Before her, upon a throne carved from the bones of ancient wolves, Alpha King Kael Thornborne looked down with eyes colder than winter iron, the most feared ruler in the northern kingdoms. A king whose wolf had not been seen in 7 years. A king who had conquered rival packs without once shifting. A king rumored to be cursed, hollow, and half dead beneath his crown. The court expected him to laugh at her, dismiss her, perhaps order her dragged back to the graves where she belonged. Instead, the moment he opened his mouth to reject her before every alpha, noblewoman, and royal counselor in the kingdom, the torches blew out, the marble cracked beneath her feet, and a massive spectral wolf rose from the darkness behind him, its throat slit with old betrayal, its silver eyes fixed not on the king who had lost it, but on the girl everyone despised. Then, in front of the entire court, the dead wolf lowered its head and bowed to her. Long before the throne hall trembled beneath her feet, Liora Vale had learned that the living feared what they did not understand, and nothing frightened the living more than a girl who was comfortable among the dead. She had been left at the edge of the Moonfall burial grounds as an infant, wrapped in a blood-stained cloak, and placed between 2 stone wolves, whose faces had been worn smooth by rain. No name, no crest, no family mark had been found with her, only a small silver thread tied around her wrist, cold even in summer, and a scent no one could explain. It was not rot, not sickness, not the sour smell of old wounds, but something older and stranger, like cold ash after a funeral fire, like iron after battle, like moonlight, falling over graves no one dared visit. The women of the village said the child had been abandoned by a cursed bloodline. The men said she should have been left to the wolves. But old Marin, keeper of the burial grounds, took her in and named her Liora, meaning the one who hears beneath the earth, though she never told the girl why she chose such a name. From the moment Liora could walk, she followed Marin through the graves with a lantern in one hand and a bundle of white cloth in the other, learning how to wash blood from fallen warriors, how to close the eyes of wolves who had died mid-shift, how to speak the old blessing over bodies torn apart in pack wars, and how to stand still when grieving mothers clawed at the dirt and cursed the moon goddess for taking their sons. Other children learned to run in the fields. Liora learned the weight of a dead alpha's hand. Other girls braided flowers into their hair. Liora braided burial cords for warriors whose names she was not allowed to speak. By the time she was 17, the village called her useful only when there were bodies to burn, and shameful the rest of the time. She was an Omega, or so they told her, though even among Omegas she was considered beneath notice. She had no wolf, no pack bond that answered when the moon rose, no inner creature pressing against her bones with hunger and instinct. At every first shift ceremony, she had stood with the other young wolves beneath the silver moon, watching their bodies tremble, watching their eyes flare gold, watching fur burst beneath skin as their wolves emerged in glory or terror. She had waited for the same pain, the same awakening, the same proof that she belonged to the world that had scorned her. Nothing came. No claws, no fangs, no voice inside her chest. Only silence, deep and cold, broken by something stranger than a wolf. On certain nights, when fog moved low over the burial grounds and the moon turned thin as a blade, Liora heard whispers beneath the soil. Not words at first, only breaths, sighs, the faint padded steps of paws no living ear could hear. Then names began to rise through the earth. Fenric, Asha, Calder, Miri of the East Ridge. Wolves long dead spoke in fragments, not to frighten her, but as if they were searching for someone they had lost. When she told Marin, the old woman grew pale, pressed 2 fingers to Alara's lips, and warned her never to speak of it again. The living will not forgive a girl who hears the dead, Marin whispered. They will either fear you, use you, or burn you in the name of purity. So Liora hid her gift beneath obedience. She kept her eyes lowered when soldiers mocked her. She kept her voice soft when noblewomen ordered her to carry bones from the battlefield. She endured the way people stepped aside when she passed, not from respect, but disgust, as if the shadow of every corpse she had touched clung to her skin. The cruelest among them called her the Grave Girl, and the name spread faster than truth ever could. Children chanted it behind her. Warriors spat it when she carried their fallen brothers. Young unmated wolves laughed and asked whether death had chosen her because no living mate ever would. Liora never answered. She had learned that silence was armor, though it was thin armor, and every insult found its way through. The war that changed her life began in the western passes, where the Bloodfang pack broke its treaty with the crown and slaughtered 3 border villages beneath a red moon. The northern kingdom answered with steel, fang, and royal command, though whispers moved faster than messengers. The Alpha King would ride to war, they said, but not as a wolf. Kael Draven, the Iron Alpha, the wolf-crowned king, the last of the royal Draven bloodline, had not shifted since the night his father died, and his council placed the crown upon his head. Some claimed his wolf had been cursed by enemy witches. Some claimed the king had killed it himself, to become stronger than instinct. Some claimed he had no wolf at all, only a throne and a terrifying will. Liora knew nothing of kings, except the bodies their wars sent to her graves. But when the wounded began arriving from the Western Front, she heard something beneath their dying breaths that made her blood turn cold. The dead wolves were not merely mourning, they were warning. For 7 nights after the first battle, Liora dreamed of a black wolf standing in a ruined throne room, its throat cut by a silver blade, its body chained to the roots of an ancient tree. It did not howl. It did not rage. It only watched her with eyes like dying stars. And each time she woke, ash covered her palms, though no fire had burned nearby. Meryn saw the marks and trembled. "If the dead king's wolf has found you," she said, "then the court will not be far behind." Liora asked what she meant, but Meryn would not answer. 3 days later, royal riders arrived at the burial grounds, their cloaks black, their armor stamped with the Draven crest, and their commander read a decree before the graves. By order of the royal council, every unmated female of eligible blood, from noble-born daughters to packless omegas, would be summoned to the capital for the king's choosing. The kingdom needed a Luna. The Alpha King needed a queen. The court would decide which woman carried the strongest bond to stabilize the throne. Liora almost laughed when her name was read. She had no bloodline, no wolf, no dowry, no pack worth naming. The commander's lip curled when he saw her ash-stained dress and the burial cords tied at her waist. "This one?" he asked, as though the paper itself had offended him. The scribe checked the decree and nodded uneasily. Liora looked to Meryn, hoping the old woman would refuse, but Meryn's face had gone gray. That night, while the riders waited beyond the gates, Meryn gave Liora a cloak lined with faded silver thread and pressed a bone charm into her hand. "Whatever happens in that court, do not let them see you afraid," she said. "And if the dead bow, child, remember this. It is not to shame you. It is because they know what the living have forgotten." Before dawn, Liora left Moonfall in a wagon meant for servants, seated between sacks of burial salt and iron chains for prisoners, while noble daughters rode ahead in velvet carriages, perfumed, jeweled, and already dreaming of a crown. The capital of Ravengard rose from the mountains like a fortress carved out of night. Its towers were black stone, its banners silver and blood-red, its gates guarded by wolves larger than horses. Liora entered with the other summoned women beneath a storm-heavy sky, and felt the city recoil from her before anyone knew her name. Servants smelled the ash on her and whispered. Noble girls stared at the burial cords on her wrists. One of them, Lady Seraphine Morcant, daughter of the High Council's most powerful bloodline, smiled as if she had found a knife and a wound in the same moment. Seraphine was everything Liora was not. Golden-haired, royal, blooded, trained in court speech, dressed in white silk embroidered with moonstones. She had been favored for years as the future Luna, and every glance in the palace confirmed it. When she passed Liora in the women's hall, she paused only long enough to say, "How generous of the council to invite a reminder of where failed candidates belong." Her ladies laughed. Liora lowered her eyes, but her hands tightened around the bone charm in her pocket, and from somewhere beneath the palace floor, a dead wolf growled. The choosing was held the next night beneath the full moon, though no moonlight touched the throne hall. The roof was covered in black glass, the walls hung with war banners, the floor polished so sharply that every torch flame looked like a trapped star. Alphas from rival packs stood along the edges in ceremonial armor. Noblewomen gathered like swans before a frozen lake. The royal council took their places beside the throne, led by High Counselor Morden Morcant, Seraphine's father, a narrow-faced man with silver hair and eyes that never seemed to blink. Beside him stood Commander Thorne, the king's most trusted war leader, broad-shouldered, scarred, and silent. When the horn sounded, the hall fell into a hush so complete that Liora could hear the pulse of every living wolf in the chamber. Then, Alpha King Kael Thornborne entered. He was not beautiful in the soft way poets praised princes. He was severe, carved from shadow and command, with black hair falling to his shoulders and a crown of dark iron resting above eyes that burned a cold, unnatural gold. Every wolf in the room lowered their gaze when he passed, not because he asked it, but because their instincts recognized danger before thought could interfere. He wore no ceremonial jewels, only armor beneath a long black cloak, as though even a court ritual was another battlefield. Yet there was something wrong with him, something Liora sensed before she understood it. Around every living alpha, she could feel the echo of a wolf beneath the skin, restless and warm. Around Kael, there was only a hollow space, vast and silent, like a grave sealed too early. When his gaze swept the hall, it passed over noble daughters, counselors, soldiers, and finally landed on Liora. For one heartbeat, the king went utterly still. Then his expression hardened, and Liora knew that whatever he had sensed in her, he hated it. The ritual began with names, bloodlines, and offerings. Each candidate stepped forward, bowed, and presented a token of her house. Seraphine offered a silver dagger from the first Luna's armory, and the court murmured with approval. Another noblewoman offered a wolf pelt from a defeated southern alpha. Another gave a moonstone vial filled with sacred water. Then, Liora's name was called, not with honor, but with hesitation. "Liora Vale of Moonfall," the herald announced, his voice thinning. "Keeper of burial rites, unbonded Omega." The words struck the hall like rotten fruit. Laughter moved through the nobles. Someone whispered, "Grave girl." Someone else muttered that the council had gone mad. Liora walked forward anyway, each step echoing. She had no token but the bone charm Marin had given her, and when she held it out, Seraphine laughed softly enough for only nearby ears to hear. A dead thing from a dead girl. How fitting. Liora reached the base of the throne and knelt, because the ritual demanded it, not because her heart accepted it. Kael looked down at the charm, then at the ash beneath her fingernails. His jaw tightened. "Who brought this woman into my hall?" His voice was low, but it carried like thunder under ice. Counselor Morden bowed. "The decree required all eligible females, Your Majesty. Even the lowest blood must be measured, lest the moon goddess hide power in humble vessels." The words were pious, but Liora heard the mockery beneath them. Kael descended one step from the throne. The air changed around him, pressing against every throat. "Power?" he said. "She smells of graves." A ripple of cruel amusement moved through the hall. Liora forced herself not to flinch. Kael's eyes sharpened. "Do you have a wolf, Liora Vale?" Her name in his mouth felt like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. "No, Your Majesty," she answered. More laughter. "Do you have a pack that claims you?" "No, Your Majesty." Do you have royal blood? Battle magic? A bond mark? Any sign that you belong in this court?" Her mouth went dry. "No, Your Majesty." He stared at her for a long moment, and something like pain flickered behind the gold of his eyes before pride buried it. "Then hear me, before the throne, the council, and every alpha gathered beneath my roof. I reject death at my court. I reject weakness beside my crown. I reject you as Luna, as mate, and as anything the moon goddess might have intended." The words should have ended her. They should have reduced her to another humiliated Omega in a long history of royal cruelty. The court expected tears. Seraphine expected collapse. Counselor Morden expected silence. But as the rejection echoed through the hall, Liora felt something open beneath her ribs. Not a wolf, not rage, but a door. The bone charm in her palm turned cold enough to burn. The torches bent sideways, though. There was no wind. Far beneath the palace, beneath stone and root and buried blood, something answered her pain. The black glass ceiling trembled. The throne's carved wolf skulls began to weep silver light. And behind Alpha King Kael Thornborne, where no living wolf had stood in 7 years, a massive spectral beast rose from the king's shadow. The court screamed. Alphas stumbled back. Seraphine dropped her moonstone fan, and Counselor Morden's face lost every trace of color. The wolf was enormous, larger than any living beast, its fur black as a moonless forest, its eyes silver with ancient grief. Across its throat was a wound that had never healed, a slash of spectral light where betrayal had cut too deep for death to close. Kael turned slowly, and for the first time since entering the hall, fear touched his face. Not fear of the wolf, fear for it. The dead beast looked past him, past the throne, past every noble and soldier, and fixed its gaze on Liora. Then it lowered its head and bowed. No one moved. No one breathed. Liora remained kneeling, unable to understand why the dead wolf from her dreams now stood in the king's shadow like a ghost returning to accuse the living. The wolf's voice entered her mind, deep and broken. Moon Gravekeeper. At the sound of that name, power surged through the floor. The burial cords at her wrists glowed silver. Around the hall, the shadows of other wolves began to appear, faint at first, then clearer. Dozens of dead warriors standing behind the living alphas who had forgotten them. Liora heard them all at once, a tide of grief and recognition. Found. She is found. The grave blood lives. The Queen of the Lost has come. Then Counselor Morden shouted a command, and iron bells hidden in the walls began to ring. The sound tore through the spectral wolves like a weapon. The king's dead wolf staggered, snarling in pain. Liora cried out as if the blow had struck her own bones. Guards rushed forward. Kael reached for her, whether to protect or seize her, she did not know. But Commander Thorne moved faster. He caught Liora by the arm, twisted it behind her back, and dragged her away from the throne as the court erupted. The last thing she saw before a black hood was thrown over her head was Kael standing amid the chaos, staring at the place where his dead wolf had bowed, his rejection still hanging between them like a curse that could no longer be taken back. They did not take Liora to the women's hall or the servant quarters. They took her beneath the palace. Downstairs carved so deep into the mountain that the air turned wet and cold. Past doors barred with silver, past old cells where enemies of the crown had carved prayers into stone with broken nails. When the hood was removed, she found herself in a chamber lined with iron bells, each one etched with runes that made her skull ache. Commander Thorne shoved her inside and chained her wrists to a ring in the wall. "Whatever trick you performed in the throne hall," he said, "you will not perform it again." Liora looked at him, at the silver scars crossing his throat, at the strange emptiness in his eyes, and felt a dead wolf whisper from somewhere beyond the wall. "Traitor. Bloodhand." She did not know what it meant, but Thorne's gaze sharpened, as though he had heard the whisper through her. "Keep your ghosts quiet, grave girl," he said. "The court has buried worse things than you, for hours, perhaps longer. Liora sat in the dark with the iron bells humming around her. Above, the palace continued its rituals as if the world had not split open. She imagined Seraphine recovering her perfect smile. Imagined Counselor Morden explaining the anomaly away as witchcraft. Imagined Kael Thornborne denying before his court that the dead wolf had meant anything. The rejection burned inside her. Not because she had wanted his crown, but because he had looked at her and seen only what everyone else saw. Graves, ash, weakness, death. She told herself it did not matter. Kings did not matter. Courts did not matter. She had survived without belonging before, and she would survive again. But when she closed her eyes, she saw the spectral wolf bowing, and beneath the memory came a strange ache, as if some part of her had recognized him before her mind could. Near midnight, the bells stopped humming. The silence was so sudden that Liora lifted her head. A shadow moved beyond the bars. Not a guard. Not Thorn. Alpha King Kael Thornborne stepped into the corridor alone, wearing no crown now. Only a dark tunic open at the throat, and the exhaustion of a man who had spent too many years fighting a war inside his own skin. In the torchlight, he looked younger and more haunted than he had upon the throne. Still dangerous, still commanding, but not untouchable. His eyes found the chains on her wrists, and something in his expression tightened. "Leave us," he said. The guards obeyed without hesitation. Liora almost laughed at the absurdity of obedience. With one word, he could empty a dungeon. With one word, he had humiliated her before a kingdom. Kael stood outside the bars for a long moment. "What are you?" he asked. Ilara's lips parted, but grief answered before fear could. "I could ask you the same." His eyes flashed. "Careful." "Why?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Will you reject me again? Chain me deeper? Tell another court that I smell like death?" The words landed harder than she expected. His jaw moved as if he were grinding down a response. What happened in the hall was forbidden magic. "I did not summon it. My wolf appeared behind me." "Then perhaps you should ask why your wolf came to me." Silence. The torch flame shuddered. Kael stepped closer to the bars. "My wolf is dead." There it was, spoken plainly, stripped of rumor. Liora felt the truth of it settle like frost. "How?" she whispered. For the first time, the king looked away. "No one knows," but beneath his answer, the dead stirred, and Liora heard the black wolf's voice again, faint and wounded. "Lies built the throne. Silver beneath the roots. Blood beneath the crown." Liora flinched. Kael saw it. "You hear him." It was not a question. She swallowed. "Sometimes." "What does he say?" "I do not understand all of it. Tell me." The command rang with alpha force, the kind that could bend weaker wolves to obedience. But Liora had no wolf to submit, and whatever lived inside her did not bow to living kings. She lifted her chin. "No." His eyes narrowed, not with anger alone but surprise. "You refuse your king? You rejected me before your court. Perhaps that frees me from pretending your cruelty deserves devotion." The dungeon seemed to hold its breath. No one spoke to Kael Thornborne like that. Liora knew it the moment the words left her mouth, yet she did not regret them. For years, she had lowered her gaze to survive. Something about the king's dead wolf bowing had made lowering her gaze feel like a lie. Kael unlocked the cell himself. The door groaned open. Liora braced as he approached, but instead of striking her, he took her chained wrists in his hands. His fingers were warm, strong, and unexpectedly careful as he examined the silver-burned skin beneath the iron cuffs. "These runes are meant for necromancers," he said coldly, turning toward the corridor. "Who ordered them?" No guard answered. Kael's expression darkened. With one sharp motion, he broke the first chain, then the second, as easily as if the iron had offended him by touching her. Liora stumbled forward, suddenly free, and he caught her before she fell. For one heartbeat, her palms pressed against his chest. Beneath his skin, she felt that hollow grave space again, and beneath the hollow, something beating weakly from far away. The dead wolf stirred. Kael's breath caught. Liora jerked back, shaken. He released her at once. "You will come with me," he said. "No. This palace has already decided what you are. If you remain here, the council will kill you before dawn." "And you?" she asked. "Have you not decided?" His gaze held hers, and for the first time the king did not look certain. "I decided too quickly." It was not an apology. Not yet. But it cracked the stone between them. He turned toward the door. "Walk beside me, or be dragged by men who fear you. Choose." Liora hated that he was right. She followed him out of the cell, barefoot, wrists raw, into a palace that had changed its mind about her danger, but not its cruelty. The royal chambers were guarded by 12 wolves in black armor, yet none met Liora's eyes as the king led her inside. The room was vast and severe, filled with maps, weapons, and tall windows overlooking the moonlit mountains. No softness lived there except a single faded wolf pelt laid before the hearth, worn nearly smooth with age. Kael dismissed the servants and closed the doors. "You will remain here until I know what happened in the hall." Liora stared at him. "In your chambers? Behind my guards. Behind your power. Behind the only door the council cannot open without my permission." That silenced her, though not comfortably. He moved to the hearth, poured wine into a silver cup, then seemed to remember himself and set it down untouched. His hands trembled once before he closed them into fists. Liora noticed. "You are ill." He gave a humorless smile. "Careful, grave girl. Concern from you might sound like mercy." It was not mercy, it was observation. "Then observe, quietly." He turned away, but his shoulders tightened in pain. A low growl filled the room, though no living wolf stood there. The shadows near the hearth bent toward him. Kael gripped the mantle, breathing hard. Liora felt the air grow cold, felt the dead pressing close. The black wolf appeared again, faint and flickering beside him, its silver eyes full of agony. Chains of pale light bound its legs. Each time Kael inhaled, the chains tightened. Each time the wolf struggled, the king's body shook. Liora forgot her anger for one dangerous moment. "They did something to him," she whispered. Kael looked over his shoulder, face pale. "What do you see?" "Your wolf. He is chained." "By whom?" The black wolf's eyes shifted toward the closed doors, toward the palace beyond, toward the unseen council chambers. Liora stepped closer without meaning to. The spectral beast lowered its head, not in submission now, but plea. "Gravekeeper. Release requires truth. Blood remembers." She reached out, and Kael caught her wrist before she touched the apparition. The contact struck them both like lightning. The room vanished. Liora saw a younger Kael kneeling in a forest of white trees beneath a blood moon, his hands bound in ceremonial silver, his father's body burning on a pyre behind him. Councillor Morden stood before him with the crown. Commander Thorn held a silver blade. Noble witnesses chanted an oath of stability, loyalty, sacrifice. Kael's wolf, alive then, massive and black and furious, fought within him as the council forced the blade through a shadow at his feet. A howl tore across the vision, not from Kael's mouth, but from his soul. The wolf was cut away, not killed cleanly, but severed, chained, buried beneath the palace roots, while the young king collapsed, and Morden whispered, "A king ruled by grief is dangerous. A king without his wolf can be guided." Liora staggered back with a cry. Kael caught her again, though he looked as shaken as she was. "What did you see?" he demanded. She stared at him, horror rising. "You were not cursed by enemies." The room seemed to darken. "Liora, your council murdered your wolf." For a long moment, Kael did not move. The words entered him slowly, like a blade finding old scar tissue. "No," he said, but it was not denial. It was the sound of a man realizing part of him had always known. Morden swore the severing was necessary to save the kingdom. My father had died. The packs were splitting. My wolf was uncontrollable. He was grieving, Liora whispered. So were you. Kael turned away, and for the first time, the feared Alpha King looked less like a ruler than a boy left alone in a forest, betrayed by every hand that had crowned him. Then, the pain in him sharpened into fury. The windows rattled. Every guard outside the door growled in instinctive fear. If what you say is true, he said, voice dangerously soft, then every oath in this palace is built on treason. Before Liora could answer, the chamber doors burst open. Seraphine entered in a rush of white silk, flanked by 2 ladies and a priestess of the Moon Temple. Her gaze took in Liora standing too close to the king, the broken chains on her wrists, the cold fire in the room. For one perfect second, jealousy stripped the sweetness from her face. Then she bowed. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. My father sent me. The court is restless. They say the grave girl bewitched you. Kael's expression closed like a fortress gate. The court says many things. Seraphine's eyes shifted to Liora. And sometimes the court is right. A wolfless Omega appears from burial pits, summons a dead beast, and is brought into the king's private chamber before dawn. What else should loyal subjects think? Liora expected Kael to dismiss her, perhaps to hide the truth. Instead, he stepped between them. They should think their king has not asked for their permission. Seraphine's smile trembled. Of course, Your Majesty. But dangerous women often appear helpless before they destroy kings. The words were for Kael, but her eyes remained on Liora, especially women who smell of death. Something inside Liora went very still. The insult no longer hurt the same way. It felt like a door being tested. Behind her, though no one else saw them clearly, shadows gathered in the corners of the chamber, the shapes of wolves long buried beneath Ravengard stones. Seraphine's priestess gasped and clutched her moon pendant. Kael noticed. So did Seraphine. Fear flickered across the noblewoman's face, and fear quickly became hatred. Kael dismissed them with a command that allowed no argument, but Seraphine lingered at the threshold. A king must choose carefully what he brings near his heart, she said softly. Some things buried in graves are buried for a reason. When the doors closed, Liora felt the palace shift around her. The rejection had made her a joke. The anomaly had made her a threat. But the king's protection, however uncertain, had made her a target. By morning, Ravengard had swallowed the truth and vomited out rumors. In the servant corridors, Liora heard that she had crawled from a mass grave wearing the faces of dead queens. In the training yard, warriors muttered that she had stolen the king's wolf with grave magic. In the noble hall, ladies whispered that Kael had brought her into his chambers because her curse had already taken root in his blood. Every rumor carried the same warning. She did not belong among the living. Kael ordered that no one touch her. But orders could not soften stares, and power could not silence fear. He gave her a room connected to his own by a guarded passage, not as a lover, not as a prisoner, but as something between necessity and danger. Servants brought her clean gowns and refused to cross the threshold. Food arrived covered, though she later found powdered wolfsbane hidden beneath the bread. When she told Kael, he crushed the plate in one hand and sent 3 guards to the kitchens. But Liora had seen enough graves to know poison was rarely mixed by the hand that wanted death most. Someone important had decided she should not survive long enough to speak. Kael changed after the vision, though not in ways the court could easily read. In public, he remained cold, commanding, unyielding. He attended council with Liora standing behind his chair like a shadow no one dared name. And every time Morden spoke, the king watched him with a stillness sharper than rage. In private, however, the cracks widened. He asked questions he had never allowed himself to ask. Who had signed the severing rites? Which priestesses had witnessed them? Where beneath the palace did the old roots grow? Why did the iron bells hurt the dead? Liora answered what she could, which was little. Her gift had always come like weather, not scholarship. She knew when spirits lingered, when grief soured into rage, when bones remembered violence. She did not know royal ritual or forbidden law. Yet whenever Kael stood near her, The hollow inside him stirred, and the dead wolf appeared more clearly, as if her presence gave it strength. The first time she truly spoke with the wolf, Kael was asleep, or near sleep. For kings like him did not rest so much as lose small battles against exhaustion. Liora sat by the hearth in his war room while snow pressed against the windows, and the palace settled into uneasy quiet. Kael had fallen asleep in a chair over maps of the western border, one hand still curled around a dagger. The fire burned low. Then the great black wolf stepped from the shadow of the hearth and stood between them, translucent but vivid, its fur rippling like smoke underwater. Liora did not run. She had spent her life among the dead. This spirit frightened her less than the living men who had chained it. "What is your name?" she whispered. The wolf's ears twitched. "Names hold doors. Then what should I call you?" The beast looked toward Kael, and sorrow moved through the room like wind through a ruined chapel. "He called me Eric." Liora looked at the sleeping king. "He remembers you? More than he allows. Less than he needs." The wolf lowered its massive head. "The severing did not kill me. It bound me. The king lives with half a soul, and half a soul can be guided, poisoned, commanded. By Morden? By Morden, by Thorn, by those who feared what Kael would become if grief made him just instead of obedient." Ilara's hands tightened in her lap. "Why come to me?" The wolf's eyes turned silver, bright. "Because you are the last moon gravekeeper. Because the dead obey the blood that buried them with honor. Because long ago your mothers guarded the passage between wolf and spirit, crown and grave. Because your line was slaughtered when the council decided kings should fear death more than dishonor." Liora could not breathe. "My line?" The wolf stepped closer. Images unfolded in the fire. Women in silver veils standing beneath moonlit trees, their hands glowing over fallen wolves. Queens kneeling in battlefields to call the loyal dead home. A child wrapped in bloodstained cloth, carried through burning woods by a woman with Marin's eyes. Then flames, soldiers, council banners, a baby hidden among graves. Liora pressed a hand to her mouth. "No, I was abandoned, hidden, saved. The last seed beneath ash." The wolf's voice softened. "You smell of death because death remembers you as kin. Not as prey, not as shame, as keeper." Tears burned Ilara's eyes before she could stop them. All her life, she had been made to believe the scent that clung to her was proof of wrongness, some stain that marked her unworthy of warmth. Now, a dead wolf stood before her and called it inheritance. She wanted to reject it. She wanted to cling to the smaller pain because it was familiar. But the truth had begun to move, and truth, once risen, did not return quietly to the grave. Kael woke with a sharp inhale. Eric vanished. The king's eyes found Liora immediately. "You were speaking." She wiped her face too late. "To your wolf." His expression changed with a hunger that was almost painful. "What did he say?" She hesitated. To tell him everything would bind them together more deeply. To hide it would repeat the silence that had trapped him for 7 years. "His name is Eric." Kael went utterly still. The dagger slipped from his hand and struck the floor. For a long moment, he stared not at Liora but through her, into a past he had sealed behind iron. "I have not said that name aloud since the night my father burned," he whispered. His voice broke on the last word, and the sound pierced her more sharply than any command could have. Here was the monster king, the rejected girl's humiliator, the man who had called her death before a laughing court, and inside him was a wound no crown had healed. Something shifted between them after that. Not forgiveness, not trust. Something more dangerous because it was less chosen. Kael began to watch her not as a threat but as an answer he feared needing. Liora began to see him not as a cold throne, but as a man robbed so thoroughly that even his cruelty had roots in violation. Their conversations remained edged with conflict. He still commanded when softness frightened him. She still resisted when closeness threatened to turn need into weakness. Yet the silence between them changed. It filled with questions neither asked. Why had his wolf bowed to her? Why did her gift awaken most strongly in his presence? Why did the hollow in him ache whenever she left the room? Why did the scent he had rejected begin to calm the pain that had ruled him for years? The court noticed. Seraphine noticed most of all. She appeared at council in flawless gowns, offered wise counsel, smiled gently at Kael, and made sure Liora saw every old intimacy she could imply. She had known the king since childhood, she reminded the room. She had stood beside the throne through war, treaty, and mourning. She understood the burdens of royal blood. A graveyard omega could not. When subtlety failed, she turned cruelty into performance. At a royal supper meant to reassure the visiting alphas, Seraphine rose with a silver cup and proposed a toast. "To the purity of the crown," she said, eyes shining. "May Ravengard never forget that a Luna must bring life to the kingdom, not the stench of burial pits." Laughter fluttered like knives. Liora set her hands in her lap and stared at the untouched plate before her. Kael's cup cracked in his grip. Wine spilled over his fingers like blood. The hall fell silent. He rose slowly. "Lady Seraphine," he said, each word calm enough to terrify, "if you insult a guest under my protection again, I will send you to the burial pits for 1 month to learn what honor smells like when soldiers die for your silks." Seraphine's face went white, then red. Liora looked up, startled despite herself. The king did not look at her. That made it worse. He defended her as if it were law, not impulse. The court saw it. The rumor changed again by morning. The grave girl had bewitched the king's temper. The grave girl wore no crown but commanded his wrath. The grave girl would ruin them all. That night, Liora found a black feather on her pillow. Beneath it lay a scrap of parchment, written in old temple ink. Moon gravekeepers were executed for a reason. Leave before the next full moon, or the dead will welcome you properly. She took it to Kael. He read it once, then crossed the room so violently that the guards outside reached for weapons. "Who entered her chamber?" he demanded. No one knew, or no one dared say. Liora felt a cold pressure behind her eyes, and the room filled with whispers. Dead servants, dead guards, dead women whose names had been scraped from palace records. They spoke over one another until one voice rose clear. White silk, silver ring, blood under lilies. Liora turned toward the passage connecting her room to the outer hall. There, faint as breath on glass, a spectral handprint glowed against the stone. Kael followed her gaze. "What do you see?" "Someone used the old servant's passage. It was sealed years ago. The dead disagree." He almost smiled at that. A grim, brief thing that vanished too quickly. Together, they followed the whisper through a narrow corridor behind the walls, down 3 turns and 1 hidden stair, until they reached a chamber filled with old portraits covered in cloth. The air smelled of dust, lilies, and dried blood. At the center stood an altar marked with the council's crest. Upon it lay dozens of small bones tied with silver thread. Wolf bones, not from battle, from severing rights. Kael went silent in a way that made the room colder. Liora stepped closer and felt the dead recoil. These were not honored remains. They were trophies, proof, anchors. The council had not severed only Kael's wolf. They had done it before, to heirs, rivals, alphas too powerful to guide. The bones trembled as Liora lifted her hand. Whispers rose. Names, betrayals, kings weakened, queens silenced, wolves cut from souls, and bound beneath political peace. At the back of the altar, half hidden under black cloth, lay a silver blade with a hilt shaped like a wolf's open mouth. Kael reached for it, but Liora caught his wrist. "Do not." He looked at her. "Why?" The blade pulsed, and Eric's wounded voice filled the room. "That is the knife that killed me." Before either could move, the hidden door slammed shut behind them. Iron bells began to ring inside the walls. Liora cried out and fell to her knees. The dead bones on the altar shook violently. Kael staggered as pain ripped through the hollow where Eric should have been. From the shadows beyond the portraits, Commander Thorn emerged with 10 armed men. His eyes held no surprise, only regret buried too deep to matter. "Your Majesty," he said, drawing his sword, "you should not have come here." Kael straightened slowly, though pain had drained the color from his face. "You will lower your sword, Commander." Thorn's grip tightened. "I swore to protect the crown. I am the crown." "No," Thorn said, and the word shattered 7 years of loyalty. "You are the danger the crown must survive." The soldiers shifted uneasily, but none withdrew. Liora remained on the floor, one hand pressed to her temple as the iron bells tore through every spirit in the chamber. The wolf bones clattered. The whispers turned to screams. Kael took one step toward Thorn, and 3 soldiers raised silver crossbows. "Do you understand what Morden did?" Kael asked, voice low. "He murdered my wolf." Thorn's face tightened, not with shock, but with the agony of a man who had made peace with damnation and hated being reminded. He saved the kingdom from a grieving boy who would have burned every rival pack to ash. That was not your choice to make. It was the council's choice. And yours. The words struck. For a heartbeat, Thorn looked at Liora, and she saw the truth. He had held the blade. He had cut the shadow. He had heard Eric howl. The bells grew louder. Liora felt blood run from her nose. Kael heard her gasp and turned. That moment of concern nearly killed him. Thorn lunged. The silver blade flashed. Kael twisted aside, but not fast enough. The edge cut across his ribs, and his blood hit the stone. The room erupted. Soldiers fired. Kael moved like a storm, even without his wolf, breaking one man's arm, driving another into the wall, seizing a crossbow bolt before it pierced his throat. But the bells kept ringing, and every ring weakened him. Liora tried to rise. A soldier seized her hair and dragged her toward the altar. "Morden wants her alive," Thorn snapped. For now. For now." The words opened something dark in Liora. The soldier forced her hand onto the altar, onto the wolf bones tied in silver. Pain shot through her palm, followed by a flood of memories that were not hers. Wolves screaming as they were cut from kings. Queens begging as counselors called their power unstable. Moon gravekeepers burned in white forests. A woman with Liora's eyes pressing a silver-threaded cloak around a baby and whispering, "Live where the dead can hide you." Liora's grief became rage, but not the hot rage of battle. It was older, colder, rooted in every grave she had tended without knowing she was tending her own murdered lineage. The soldier holding her suddenly froze. Behind him, a spectral wolf rose from the floor, then another, then another. The iron bells rang harder, but the dead did not retreat this time. They turned toward Liora, waiting, asking, recognizing. Thorn saw them and shouted for the bells to be struck louder. Kael fought toward her, bleeding, eyes burning gold. "Liora!" She looked at him through a veil of pain. For the first time in her life, she did not ask whether she had the right to command what answered her. She placed both hands on the altar of stolen wolf bones and whispered, "Rise." The chamber exploded with silver light. The bells shattered one by one, raining iron fragments across the floor. Dead wolves burst from the bones, from the walls, from the roots beneath the palace. Not as faint shadows now, but as war spirits with eyes like moons and teeth like carved stars. Soldiers screamed and dropped their weapons. One wolf leaped through a man's body, leaving him unconscious but unbloodied, as if judged and dismissed. Another pinned a traitorous guard beneath spectral paws. The largest of them, an ancient she-wolf with scars across her face, bowed once to Liora before turning on the altar and crushing the silver-threaded bones beneath her jaws. Thorn backed away, horror twisting his scarred features. "Impossible." Liora rose, trembling, her hands glowing with grave silver fire. "No," she said, and her voice carried with the voices of the dead beneath it. Buried, Kael stared at her, as if the world had remade itself in her shape. The girl he had rejected as weakness now stood amid an army no living alpha could command. The scent of ash filled the chamber, no longer shameful but sacred. Death had not marked her as cursed. Death had armed her. Thorn made one final desperate move. He seized the silver blade from the altar and hurled it at Liora. Kael crossed the chamber in a blur and took the blade through his own shoulder. The force drove him to one knee. Liora cried out, catching him as he fell. The wound smoked with old severing magic. Eric appeared behind him, howling soundlessly as the blade's power dragged at the chains binding his spirit. Thorn fled through the hidden passage, but neither Kael nor Liora could follow. The king's blood soaked her dress. His breath came harsh and uneven. "Leave me," he commanded, though his hand clutched her wrist. "Find proof. Tell the packs." "Be silent," she snapped, pressing her glowing hands over the wound. His eyes widened despite the pain. "You just ordered your king to be silent. You rejected me. Perhaps that frees me from court manners." A faint, impossible laugh escaped him, then turned to a groan. Healing was not her gift. Not exactly, but the dead knew how bodies failed, and they whispered instructions as Liora worked. Not the flesh, the bond. The blade cut spirit first. She closed her eyes and reached not into the wound, but through it, following the silver poison toward the place where Kael's soul had been torn. There she found chains wrapped around Eric, anchored deep beneath the palace. She touched one, and pain ripped through her so violently she nearly collapsed. Kael felt it. "Stop. No. Liora, stop." His voice was no longer a king's order. It was a plea. She opened her eyes. "Your wolf bowed to me. I will not leave him chained." Something raw moved across Kael's face, deeper than gratitude, more dangerous than desire. "Why?" he whispered. The answer came before she could make it safe. "Because I know what it is to be buried while still alive." The chamber quieted around them. The spectral wolves circled, guarding. Kael looked at her, as if her words had entered the hollow place inside him, and lit a candle there. He lifted one bloodied hand, stopping just short of touching her face, as if unsure he had earned the right. "Liora," he said softly, and in his voice her name no longer sounded like a blade. It sounded like something he feared losing. Then the palace bells above began to toll. Not iron this time, but the great bronze bells of public alarm. Counselor Morden had made his move. By dawn, the royal council declared that Alpha King Kael Draven had been bewitched by a grave witch and wounded in a forbidden ritual. Commander Thorn, bleeding from spectral claw marks but alive, stood beside Morden in the outer court and swore before the gathered packs that Liora had attacked the king, summoned dead beasts, and attempted to seize the throne through necromancy. Seraphine appeared in mourning white, tears shining like jewels, and begged the nobles to save Kael from the creature corrupting him. The council ordered the palace sealed. The king's guard split in confusion. Some remained loyal to Kael. Others obeyed Thorn. Rival alphas, sensing weakness, sharpened their ambitions. Kael, weakened by the silver wound, could not appear before the court without risking collapse. Morden knew it. Thorn knew it. Seraphine knew it. "They will force a trial," Kael said from the hidden chamber where Liora had brought him with help from the spectral wolves. "Not to judge you. To expose you before the packs and frighten them into demanding your execution." Liora wrapped a clean cloth around his shoulder, avoiding his gaze because closeness had become harder to survive than insult. "Then we leave. If I flee, Morden wins. He will claim the throne is compromised and name a regency. Seraphine will become his chosen Luna in all but title, and every pack that fears grave magic will kneel. Then we fight. With what army?" Liora looked toward the walls, where faint silver eyes waited in the stone. "One," he buried. Kael followed her gaze, and despite the blood loss, something like awe passed over him. "You would raise the dead against the royal council?" "No," Liora said. "I would let the dead testify." He studied her for a long moment. "That may be more dangerous. Truth usually is." He leaned back, pale but smiling faintly. "You sound less like an Omega every hour," She tightened the bandage harder than necessary. "And you sound surprised every time a woman has a spine." His smile deepened, then faded into something gentler. "Not surprised. Ashamed, I failed to see yours sooner." The words stilled her hands. Outside, the kingdom prepared to condemn her. Inside, the man who had publicly rejected her was learning to regret with the same intensity he once commanded. Their plan required proof hidden deeper than the altar chamber. Eric told them where to search. Beneath the old moon temple, in the root crypt where the first kings had sworn never to sever wolf from soul. There, the original oaths were carved in stone, and there, the council had anchored Kael's wolf. To reach it, they had to cross a palace, crawling with divided guards, secret passages, and ghosts that remembered too much. Kael insisted on coming despite his wound. Liora argued until his eyes flashed. "This is my wolf, and this is my bloodline. You are not walking into danger alone. Neither are you." The silence that followed was not conflict. It was recognition. Neither knew how to be protected. Neither knew how to need without resentment. Yet when Kael offered his hand to help her down a broken stair, Liora took it, and for once, neither pulled away quickly. The path beneath the temple was narrow, lit by blue witchfire that burned without heat. Old carvings lined the walls, queens with silver-veiled faces standing beside kings in wolf form, gravekeepers blessing, fallen warriors, a moon-crowned woman holding a black wolf by the muzzle, not in domination, but in trust. Liora touched the carving and felt a pulse of recognition. Kael watched her. "She looks like you. Or I look like someone they tried to erase." They failed. His voice carried quiet certainty. Liora wanted to believe it. But power did not erase fear. If anything, it gave fear sharper teeth. What if the court was right to be afraid? What if the dead obeyed her today but consumed her tomorrow? What if the scent of death was not shame, but destiny, and destiny demanded more than she could bear? At the root crypt, they found the answer and the trap together. The chamber was circular, open to the mountain's living roots, which grew through stone like veins. At the center stood a black iron stake driven into the earth. Around it coiled silver chains, each etched with Kael's blood and Eric's name. The dead wolf knelt beside the stake, bound so tightly his spectral body flickered. When Kael saw him, the king's face broke. Not fully, not loudly, but enough. He stepped forward as if approaching a grave he had never been allowed to mourn. "Eric," he whispered. The wolf lifted his head. "Kael." The name filled the chamber with sorrow. Liora felt like an intruder on a grief older than her presence, yet Eric looked to her. "Moon Gravekeeper, the chain cannot break unless the living king gives back what was taken, and the keeper claims what was hidden." "What does that mean?" she asked. The roots shuddered. Before the wolf could answer, the chamber doors slammed open. Morden entered with Seraphine, Thorn, 6 council guards, and 3 Moon Temple priestesses carrying iron bells. Morden's smile was thin and triumphant. "It means, child, that bloodlines are stubborn things. We wondered when yours would reveal itself." Kael moved in front of Liora, despite his wound. Morden sighed as if disappointed by a student. "Still protecting her? Even now? Your father had the same weakness for grave, blood. That is why he had to die." The chamber went silent. Kael's gold eyes darkened. "What did you say?" Morden's smile sharpened. "Your father discovered our safeguards. He intended to restore the old balance between crown and moon gravekeepers. He believed kings should rule with wolves, not councils. A noble thought. A fatal one." Kael lunged, but the priestesses rang the iron bells. Eric screamed. Kael collapsed to one knee. Liora reached for him, but Thorn seized her from behind, pressing a silver knife to her throat. Seraphine stepped forward, eyes bright, with jealousy and fear. "Look at her, Kael. Look at what she brings. Ghosts, treason, madness. You would throw away a kingdom for a burial pit girl?" Kael lifted his head. pain carving shadows beneath his eyes. He looked at Liora, at the knife against her throat, at the grave silver light beginning to glow beneath her skin. "No," he said. "I would take back a kingdom from the cowards who made me empty." Morden's expression hardened. "Then you will die empty." He raised his hand. The priestesses rang the bells in unison, and the silver chains around Eric tightened until the dead wolf's form began to tear apart. Liora felt the pain as if the chains wrapped around her own soul. The old fear surged. Hide. Lower your eyes. Survive. Then she looked at Kael, who had once rejected her before everyone, and now strained against agony to reach her. She looked at Eric, who had bowed when no living soul would. She looked at the roots beneath the chamber, roots fed by royal blood, council lies, and buried moon gravekeepers. Something inside her answered with terrifying calm. Survival was not enough. Not anymore. She grabbed Thorn's wrist with both hands and drove her head back into his face. The knife cut her throat shallowly as she twisted free. Blood ran down her collarbone. The chamber inhaled. Her blood was not red. It glowed silver black, like moonlight poured through ash. Seraphine screamed. Morden stepped back. The roots beneath the floor began to move. Liora pressed her bleeding hand to the carved oath stone at the base of the stake. Words she had never learned rose to her tongue. By grave and crown, by wolf and bone, by the names stolen and the dead unhonored, I call witness. The crypt exploded open into memory. Every ghost bound beneath Ravengard rose at once. The dead did not come like monsters. They came like an army, returning home. Wolves emerged from the roots, from the stones, from the old carvings, their bodies silver, black, gray, and white, each marked by the wounds that had ended them, and the dignity no council had managed to steal. Behind them came human spirits in burial veils, women with Alara's eyes, moon gravekeepers whose names had been burned from records. They surrounded the chamber in silence, so complete that even the iron bells faltered. Morden's priestesses dropped to their knees, not in loyalty, but terror. Thorn backed against the wall, blood running from his broken nose. Seraphine clutched her throat, as if the air had turned to water. One spirit stepped forward, taller than the others, her silver veil torn, a crown of bone and moonlight resting upon her brow. Liora knew her without knowing how. Her mother, not the woman who had raised her, not Marin, but the woman whose blood had carried the old power into hiding. The spirit lifted one hand and touched Alara's cheek. Daughter of the grave crown, last keeper of the lost. Do not ask permission from those who survived by burying you. Remember, memory struck not as vision, but as inheritance. Liora saw the moon gravekeepers not as witches in hiding, but as the sacred counterweight to alpha power. When kings died, they guided wolves home. When rulers became tyrants, they called the dead to witness. When mate bonds were corrupted, they severed curses without destroying souls. They had never ruled above the crown, but beside it, ensuring that no alpha forgot the graves beneath his throne. The council had feared them, because they could expose blood crimes no living court could prove. So the council slaughtered them, then rewrote history until grave magic became necromancy, keepers became monsters, and Liora became a nameless omega, ashamed of her own scent. Her mother's spirit turned toward Kael. This king was severed against oath. His wolf was bound by treason. The dead bear witness. The chamber answered with 1,000 growls. Morden recovered enough to snarl. Spirits have no authority over the living crown. Liora looked at him, and the grief of generations steadied her spine. Then why did you spend so many years trying to silence them? Kael rose slowly. The bells no longer held him fully, because Alara's blood on the oath stone had weakened the chains. His wound still bled, but his eyes burned with a gold that was warmer now, alive at the edges. Morden Morkant, he said, voice carrying the weight of every Draven king before him. You conspired to murder my father, severed my wolf, manipulated the throne, and betrayed the crown you swore to serve. Morden's face twisted. I preserved the kingdom. You preserved your power. Kael turned to Thorn. And you? The commander's sword shook in his hand. I obeyed the council. No, Kael said. You obeyed fear. Seraphine, seeing the tide turn, made the mistake desperation often makes. She lunged toward Liora with a ceremonial dagger hidden in her sleeve. Not at Kael, not at the chains, but at the woman she still believed could be removed like a stain. You filthy grave-born curse, she screamed. Kael moved, but Eric moved faster. Though still chained, the dead wolf surged between them and knocked Seraphine backward with a spectral snarl. She fell before Liora, crown of golden hair spilling over the stone, eyes wide with horror. Liora looked down at her and felt no triumph, only exhaustion. You hated me because they taught you death was beneath you, Liora said softly. But every crown ends in a grave, even yours. Morden seized that moment to strike the oath stone with the silver severing blade. A crack split the chamber. The roots convulsed. Eric howled as the chains flared, dragging him toward dissolution. Kael shouted his wolf's name and reached for the stake. Liora knew then what the wolf had meant. The living king must give back what was taken. Not blood, not power, trust. Kael had to accept the wolf's pain as his own, to stop surviving as half a soul. And the keeper had to claim what was hidden, not just her magic, but her place beside the crown. She caught Kael's hand before he touched the burning chains. If you take him back, you take everything. The grief, the rage, the years stolen. His face was pale, but certain. He was mine before they taught me to fear what I felt. It may break you. Then hold me together. The words stripped the chamber bare. No command, no pride, no throne between them. Only a king asking the girl he had rejected to stand with him where power could not protect him. Liora wrapped her hand around his. Together, they gripped the first chain. Pain consumed them. Kael saw every year of Eric's imprisonment, every time his wolf had clawed toward him, while he mistook the ache for madness. Liora felt every moon gravekeeper burning, every mother hiding a child, every grave dug in silence. Their suffering braided, not because it was the same, but because both had been made alone by the same hands. The chain cracked. Morden shouted for the guards to stop them, but the dead wolves blocked every path. The second chain shattered. Kael roared, not with a human voice, but not yet with a wolf's either. The third chain resisted, burning black. Ilara's knees buckled. Kael caught her with his free arm, holding her against him as if the court, the council, and the world could fall, and he would still choose that single act. Stay with me, he said. I am here, she answered. They broke the final chain. Eric returned like a storm breaking through a sealed tomb. Black fire erupted from Kael's body, not consuming him, but completing him. His bones shifted, his eyes blazed. For one terrifying moment, Liora feared the transformation would tear him apart. Then the king threw his head back and howled, and the sound shook Ravengard from crypt to tower. Above them, in the throne hall, nobles screamed as every torch turned silver. In the courtyard, living wolves dropped to their knees. In the city, old graves cracked open not to release horror, but light. When the fire faded, Kael stood transformed beside her. Not fully beast, not fully man, but something royal and ancient. His wolf's power restored beneath his skin. A black spectral mantle rippled from his shoulders, and behind him, Eric stood no longer wounded, his throat healed, his eyes bright. The dead wolf turned to Liora and bowed again. This time, every spirit in the chamber followed. Ilara's mother placed both spectral hands above Ilara's head. The silver thread around Ilara's wrist, hidden since infancy, unraveled and rose into the air, forming a crown of pale light. Not a queen's crown of gold and jewels. A grave crown, woven from memory, oath, and moonfire. The spirits spoke as one. Moon gravekeeper, blood of the lost queens, witness of the dead, balance of the wolf crown. Morden stared at her in naked terror. No, that line is dead. Liora turned toward him, silver-black blood drying at her throat, ash light burning in her hands. You built a kingdom on that belief. Kael stepped beside her, no longer in front of her, no longer shielding her as if she were weak, but standing with her as an equal force. And now, he said, the dead have corrected you. They dragged no one to the throne hall. The dead escorted them. By the time Kael and Liora emerged from the temple crypt, the entire court had gathered under panic and rumor. Alphas stood armed. Noblewomen clutched one another beneath the black glass ceiling. Council loyalists blocked the dais, while King's guards faced them with drawn swords. Seraphine was brought in pale and silent, her perfect composure fractured. Thorn walked under guard, no chains on his wrists, because Kael wanted every wolf in the hall to see that fear, not iron, held him now. Morden came last, flanked by spectral wolves whose teeth hovered inches from his throat. A gasp moved through the hall when Kael entered. His presence had changed beyond denial. The hollow cold that once surrounded him was gone. In its place came the full pressure of a restored Alpha King, a force so powerful that even rival rulers lowered their eyes before instinct could resist. Yet it was Liora who held the room captive. She walked beside him in a torn, blood-stained gown, barefoot, ash still on her hands, the faint grave crown glimmering above her dark hair. Behind her moved hundreds of spectral wolves, filling the throne hall from wall to wall, their silver bodies passing through pillars, banners, and soldiers. The same nobles who had laughed at her hours before now pressed themselves back in terror as the dead made room for her. Kael climbed the steps to the throne, then stopped. The court expected him to sit, to reclaim the old image of rule. Instead, he turned and descended one step, placing himself not above Liora, but beside her at the base of the dais where he had rejected her. Recognition flickered across the hall. Here. This was where he had humiliated her. This was where the dead wolf had bowed. This was where power had first betrayed its own lie. Counselor Morden tried one last performance. "People of Ravengard," he cried, voice strained but practiced. "Look upon this abomination. The king has been enthralled by forbidden grave magic. Spirits are not witnesses. They are weapons. This girl will drown the kingdom in dead wolves and call it justice." Fear stirred among the nobles. Fear was Morden's oldest language. Liora felt it moving through them, searching for old prejudice to inhabit. Grave girl, witch, curse, death. She could have answered with anger. Instead, she lifted her hand. The spectral wolves parted, and the spirits of murdered kings, severed heirs, silenced queens, and burned moon gravekeepers stepped forward. One by one, they showed the court their deaths, not in words, but in living memory cast across the black glass ceiling. Kael's father confronting Morden over forbidden severing rites, then dying beneath poison blessed by a council priestess. Young Kael bound in the white forest, Eric cut from him, while Thorn held the blade. Moon gravekeepers hunted through snow, their children taken, their histories burned. Noble houses rewarded for silence. Priests paid to preach fear of grave magic. Seraphine's mother signing a decree that condemned infants of Alara's line. The hall filled with cries, denials, sobs, and furious growls. Truth moved like fire. No one could unsee it. A rival alpha from the western border stepped forward, his scarred face grim. "If this is true, the council has ruled through soul murder." Another alpha snarled. "My grandfather died after refusing a crown treaty." His wolf vanished before his funeral. A third turned on Morden. "How many?" Morden's mask cracked. "Enough to keep you beasts from tearing each other apart." The confession struck harder than any accusation. Silence fell. Then the hall erupted. Council loyalists drew weapons. King's guards met them. Rival alphas shifted mid-leap, fur and fang flashing under torchlight. Spectral wolves surged not to slaughter, but to restrain, knocking traitors down, pinning them beneath paws of cold light. Seraphine tried to flee through a side passage, but the ghost of a young moon gravekeeper appeared before her, a child no older than 12, eyes solemn. Seraphine stopped, as if struck. "My grandmother signed nothing," she whispered, though no one had accused her aloud. The child only stared, and the noblewoman collapsed under the weight of inherited guilt. Morden, cornered and stripped of lies, revealed his final weapon. He tore open his council robe, exposing runes carved into his own chest, each one filled with blackened silver. "If the old order returns, the kingdom dies," he hissed. "Better a guided throne than a grave witch queen." He drove the severing blade into his own heart. Instead of dying, he became a vessel for every severed chain beneath Ravengard. Black magic exploded outward, striking living wolves at their bond points. Alphas screamed as their inner wolves recoiled. Kael staggered but did not fall. Liora felt the dead surge around her, alarmed. Morden had turned himself into a final bell. The throne hall fractured into chaos. The black glass ceiling cracked under the pressure of the spell. Snow and moonlight spilled through the openings. Morden rose above the floor, eyes black, voice multiplied by stolen wolf souls. "No king will kneel to graves. No wolf will answer the dead." His magic lashed toward Liora, not to kill her, but to sever her from the spirits, to make her what the world had always called her: powerless, wolfless, alone. Kael shifted fully then. The transformation was magnificent and terrifying. One moment he stood as a man. The next, an enormous black wolf launched across the shattered hall. Eric made flesh through royal blood, his fur dark as storm clouds, his eyes burning gold and silver together. He struck Morden midair, but the severing magic wrapped around his throat, reopening the old wound. Liora felt Kael's pain through a bond she had not admitted was forming. It drove her to her knees. Seraphine, trembling near the fallen dais, saw it and whispered, "He is your mate." Liora heard her, and the words should have shocked her. Instead, they settled into a truth her body had known since the dead wolf bowed. The bond between them had never begun in tenderness. It had begun in rejection, pain, necessity, and shared wounds. But beneath all of it, something ancient had been pulling them together, not gently, but relentlessly, as if the moon goddess herself had tied a thread through grave and crown. Morden's magic tightened around Kael. The black wolf snarled, clawing forward, but the severing blade in Morden's chest pulsed like a second heart. The dead wolves hesitated. They could restrain the living. They could witness truth. But this magic had been made from stolen pieces of them, twisted into a weapon. Liora understood then that the final command could not come from the dead alone. It had to come from the keeper who belonged to both grief and life. She rose. The court, the battle, the fear, the broken glass beneath her feet faded into a single line of purpose. She walked toward Morden and Kael, her blood leaving silver-black footprints on the marble. Morden laughed through the stolen voices. "Come then, grave girl. Show them what death does when it wants a crown." Liora lifted her chin. Death does not want a crown. The spirits behind her brightened. Death remembers who lied for one. She placed one hand on Kael's massive head. The wolf stilled beneath her touch, trembling with rage and pain, yet he did not snap, did not recoil. His golden silver eyes met hers. "Mate," Eric's voice rumbled, not as command, but recognition. Liora placed her other hand over the severing blade in Morden's chest. The black magic tried to enter her, tried to fill her with every stolen scream. She let it come. She had been raised among grief. She knew how to carry what others abandoned. But this time, she did not carry it alone. Kael pressed his wolf's head against her side. The dead gathered behind her. The living court watched, and Liora spoke the oldest moon gravekeeper command, the one buried before language became law. "Return what was stolen." The severing blade shattered. Morden screamed as every stolen wolf soul tore free from his runes, not in mercy, but release. Silver light burst through the hall, sweeping over alphas, guards, nobles, servants, and wolves alike. Some collapsed as lost bonds returned in fragments. Some wept without understanding why. Morden fell to the marble, suddenly only an old man with blood on his hands, and no ghosts left to hide behind. Kael shifted back into human form beside Liora, catching her before she could fall. The court stared at them, the restored Alpha King holding the grave girl he had rejected, his arms wrapped around her as if she were the last living thing in a kingdom of ruins. Morden looked up, hatred fading into fear. "You cannot let her rule beside you," he rasped. "They will fear her." Kael's eyes remained on Liora. They should fear what happens when they shame what was sacred. Then he turned to the hall. His voice thundered through Ravengard, no longer hollow, no longer guided. "The council is dissolved. Every house that took part in severing rites will answer before crown, pack, and grave. The Moon Gravekeeper line is restored under royal protection." He paused, and the court held its breath. "And Liora Vale is under no man's judgment but her own." Liora looked at him sharply. In a world of alphas, kings, bonds, and claims, he had not declared ownership. He had given her choice before witnesses. That undid her more than any vow could have. The man who had rejected her for smelling of death now stood before a trembling kingdom and made her freedom law. After the battle, Ravengard did not heal quickly. Kingdoms built on lies do not become honest in a single night, even when ghosts tear open the walls. The counselors loyal to Morden were imprisoned pending judgment before representatives of every pack. Commander Thorn surrendered his sword to Kael and requested execution, but Liora intervened, not from softness, but from understanding the difference between punishment and truth. "Let him testify," she said. "Let every order be named. Let every grave know who dug it." Kael agreed, though looking at Thorn cost him dearly. Seraphine was confined to her family wing, stripped of ceremonial rank, while investigators searched Morkant records. She sent one letter to Kael, then another to Liora. Kael burned his unopened. Liora read hers. It contained no true apology, only fear dressed as regret. She placed it in the fire and watched the white silk seal curl black. The court's treatment of Liora changed, but change born from fear is not the same as respect. Nobles who had mocked her now bowed too deeply. Servants who had avoided her now trembled when bringing food. Warriors crossed themselves when spectral wolves followed her through the halls. Some called her Lady Gravekeeper. Others whispered, Queen of the Dead, when they thought she could not hear. The name no longer cut, but it did not comfort. She had spent her life being despised for a power she did not understand. Now she was being revered for the same reason. Both felt like cages. Kael noticed. He noticed too much now. The restored bond with Eric had not made him softer in public, but it had made him painfully alive in private. He felt anger fully, grief fully, loyalty fully. Sometimes Liora found him standing in the old war room with one hand on his chest, as if relearning the shape of his own soul. Sometimes Eric's spectral form paced beside him, even when Kael remained human, and the sight stirred something in Liora that was not fear. The wolf who had bowed to her had also led Kael back to himself, and with each day, the bond between king and keeper deepened in ways neither could ignore. Yet Kael did not press. That was the greatest surprise. He summoned her to council because her testimony mattered, not because he wished to display her. He asked, before entering her chambers. He gave her access to the Moon Temple archives and the burial records of her people. He sent riders to Moonfall to bring Merrin safely to the capital. And when the old gravekeeper arrived, weeping at the sight of Alara's grave crown, Kael bowed to her with the respect owed a guardian, not a servant. Liora saw then that redemption was not a speech. It was 1,000 choices made after harm. Still, the mate bond waited between them, growing harder to deny. It came in small torments, Kael entering a room and Liora feeling the air steady, Liora cutting her hand on an old archive clasp, and Kael appearing moments later, eyes bright with alarm, though no one had called him. The scent that had once repulsed him now drew him visibly, He once stopped beside her in the temple library and closed his eyes as if the ash and moonlight presence of her quieted the old wound. "I was wrong," he said. Liora looked up from a scroll. "About which thing?" "The list is growing." His mouth curved, but his eyes were serious. "About your scent. I thought it was death." She waited. He stepped closer, leaving enough space for refusal. "It is peace after battle. It is the place a wolf can finally rest." Lilora's throat tightened. Compliments had always sounded false to her. This did not. It sounded like confession, but the past did not release them cleanly. On the 7th night after Morden's fall, the western rival Alpha, Garin of Bloodfang, arrived under a banner of truce with 300 warriors at his back. He claimed to honor the restored king, but everyone knew why he came. Ravengard was wounded, the council was broken, the court was divided, and rumors of a grave queen had spread beyond the mountains. Garin demanded proof that Kael's restoration had not made him a puppet of forbidden magic. He demanded the Moon Gravekeeper be presented before the assembled packs. He demanded, with a smile full of teeth, that if Liora truly commanded the dead, she raised the Bloodfang warriors who had fallen in the recent war and ask whether they wanted peace. It was a trap. If she refused, Garin would call her power false. If she obeyed, he would call her a necromancer disturbing honored dead. The court urged caution. The remaining priestesses warned that raising enemy spirits could turn the hall into a battlefield of ghosts. Kael's answer was immediate. "No." Liora turned to him. "You cannot refuse for me." His jaw tightened. "I can refuse a rival Alpha's attempt to use you. You can advise me." "Liora, not command." The room quieted. Kael looked at her, frustration and fear warring in his eyes. Then he inclined his head. "Advise, then. Do not give Garin what he wants." "What he wants is fear," she said. "What the dead want is witness." The confrontation took place at dusk in the outer courtyard, where snow fell over black stone and thousands gathered along the walls. Garin stood in red wolf fur, smiling as if already tasting victory. Kael stood opposite him, crowned and silent. Liora walked between them wearing a simple dark gown, her burial cords restored at her wrists, the grave crown invisible unless moonlight touched it. The crowd murmured. Some prayed, some spat, some watched with desperate hope, for many had lost sons in the war, and would endure any terror to hear one last truth. Garin spread his arms. "Let us see whether the grave girl honors all wolves, or only those useful to her king." Kael growled low, but Liora raised a hand. She knelt in the snow and pressed her palms to the earth. The dead beneath the battlefield were restless, but not hateful. War had taken them before politics could explain why. Liora did not command them to rise. She invited them. "If you wish to be heard, come." The courtyard filled with spectral warriors, Bloodfang and Draven alike. Gasps turned to sobs. Living soldiers saw dead brothers. Mothers saw sons. Garin's smile faltered as his own fallen commander stepped forward, one eye missing. Spectral armor split from shoulder to hip. "Speak," Garin ordered, trying to reclaim control. The dead commander ignored him and bowed to Liora. "We were sent to die for a treaty Lord Garin had already broken." The courtyard erupted. Garin snarled, shifting halfway before Kael moved. The restored Alpha King placed himself between Garon and Liora, but this time Liora did not remain behind him. She stood at his side. The dead Bloodfang warriors testified. Garin had engineered the border slaughter to draw Ravengard into war, expecting a weakened Kael to fall under council manipulation. Morden had corresponded with him. Seraphine's house had promised trade rights. The war that filled Alara's graves had been a game played by men who did not dig them. By the time the final spirit faded, Garin's own warriors had turned their blades against him. He lunged for Liora in a final attempt to shatter the source of truth. Kael intercepted him in wolf form, black fur flashing across snow, and the two alphas collided with a force that cracked the courtyard stones. The battle was brutal, but brief. Garin fought with ambition. Kael fought with a restored soul. When Garin fell, Throat beneath Kael's jaws, the king did not kill him. He looked to Liora, not for permission, for balance. Liora approached the defeated Alpha. The dead watched. The living waited. "Let him live," she said. "Let him return to Bloodfang stripped of command, carrying the testimony of his own dead. Let his people decide whether a coward deserves a throne." Kael released him. That mercy, sharper than execution, broke Garen more completely than death would have. The crowd understood then that the Moon Gravekeeper did not hunger for bodies. She gave the dead voice, so the living could stop feeding them. That night, Ravengard knelt. It did not happen by decree. No herald ordered it. No Alpha commanded it. As Liora crossed the courtyard after Garen's defeat, the mother of a fallen Draven soldier stepped into her path, tears frozen on her cheeks. For one awful moment, Liora braced for blame. Instead, the woman lowered herself to her knees. "You let me hear my son tell the truth," she whispered. "You are no grave curse." Another knelt. Then another. Warriors. Servants. Wolves from rival packs. Even nobles who had once laughed lowered their proud heads, though some did it with fear and others with shame. Liora stood amid them, overwhelmed, wishing Maren were beside her, wishing the child she had been could see this and understand that the scent of ash had never made her unlovable. Kael came to her slowly. The entire courtyard watched him. Snow gathered in his dark hair. His crown had been knocked loose in the fight with Garen, and he held it now in one hand. He stopped before Liora, at the same distance he had stood in the throne hall when he rejected her. The memory flashed between them. His cruel words, her humiliation, the dead wolf bowing. Kael's face tightened with the weight of it. Then, before every pack, every noble, every soldier, and every ghost, still lingering in the snow, the Alpha King lowered himself to one knee. A shock moved through the crowd. Liora could not speak. Kael looked up at her, not as a ruler granting favor, but as a man offering truth without defense. "I rejected a grave girl," he said, voice carrying through the silent courtyard. "Not knowing she was the queen of every wolf I had lost. I called sacred death a stain. I named strength as weakness, because I was too wounded to recognize either. Before crown, pack, and grave, I ask forgiveness, not as your king, but as the man who wronged you." His eyes held hers. "And if the bond between us is true, I will not claim it unless you choose it freely." Ilara's heart broke in a place that had been frozen for years. Around them, the dead wolves lowered their heads. Eric stood behind Kael, silver eyes calm. The mate bond pulsed between them, warm and terrifying. Not a chain, not a command, but a door. Liora thought of the burial grounds, of Maren's warnings, of every insult swallowed, every lonely night among graves. Every moment she believed love was meant for girls who smelled of flowers, not ash. Then she looked at the king kneeling in snow, powerful enough to command armies and humble enough, finally, to offer her choice. She touched his crown, then his face. "Rise, Kael Draven," she said softly, "not because I forgive easily, not because the bond demands it, but because a king who kneels to truth may yet be worthy of standing beside." He closed his eyes beneath her touch, and when he rose, the crowd did not cheer at first. They breathed, as if the entire kingdom had been holding something in its chest for generations and had finally let it go. The coronation of Liora Vale did not resemble any Luna ceremony Ravengard had ever seen. There were no white silks chosen by noble houses, no council vows, no purity blessings spoken by priestesses who feared the graves beneath their own temple. Liora refused every gown offered by the court seamstresses until Maren arrived with a cloak woven from dark wool and silver burial thread, the same pattern Moon Gravekeepers had worn before their line was erased. Beneath it, Liora wore a simple black dress, embroidered at the hem with tiny silver wolves, each one representing a spirit who had testified in the days after Morden's fall. She did not cover the faint scar at her throat, where Seraphine's blade had cut her. She did not perfume away the ash and moonlight scent of her bloodline. She entered the throne hall as herself, and that was the most radical magic of all. Kael waited beneath the broken black glass ceiling, where the court had chosen not to repair the cracks. Through them, moonlight fell directly onto the throne for the first time in generations. Eric stood at his side, visible to all now as a spectral guardian, no longer a wound hidden in shadow. The old throne carved from wolf bones had been removed. In its place stood 2 seats of black oak and silver root, equal in height, separated by no dais. Some nobles had protested the symbolism. Kael had listened, then asked whether they preferred exile before or after supper. The protests ended quickly. The ceremony began not with a priestess, but with names. For nearly an hour, Liora stood before the kingdom and spoke the names of the moon gravekeepers who had been murdered, the kings and wolves who had been severed, the soldiers sacrificed in false wars, and the children hidden or lost. Each name became a small flame in the air. By the end, the throne hall shimmered with hundreds of lights, not haunting, but remembered. Only then did Kael step forward with the restored wolf crown. "Liora Vale," he said, voice steady, though emotion moved beneath it. "Moon gravekeeper, witness of the dead, protector of the lost, will you stand beside the crown, not beneath it, and bind this kingdom to truth, even when truth wounds us?" Liora looked at the court that had once laughed at her, at Marin weeping silently near the front, at spectral wolves watching from every shadow, at Kael whose eyes no longer hid from pain. "I will," she said, "not for power, for balance." Then came the mate vow. It was not required for her coronation. Kael made that clear before all. The crown recognizes Liora by blood, magic, and witness. The mate bond is hers to accept or refuse beyond law. Another murmur moved through the hall, for no alpha king had ever separated crown from claim so publicly. Liora turned to him, and for once, she did not feel the old instinct to brace against humiliation. "And if I accept?" she asked, though only he stood close enough to hear the softness beneath the question. Kael's gaze lowered briefly to her lips, then returned to her eyes with aching restraint. "Then I spend my life proving that being chosen by you is not a right I take, but an honor I keep." The bond opened fully when she placed her hand in his. It did not burn like possession. It unfolded like a long-sealed crypt filling with morning light. Liora felt Kael's grief, his rage, his fierce protectiveness, his shame over the rejection, his fear that love might become another form of harm if he held too tightly. Kael felt her loneliness, her quiet endurance, her buried anger, her longing to be touched without someone flinching from the scent of graves. Neither turned away. The bond settled between them, gold and silver, wolf and grave, life and death, not as enemies, but as 2 halves of the same sacred oath. When Kael kissed her, it was not the claiming kiss the court expected from an alpha before his people. It was slow, reverent, and restrained enough to ask even then. Liora answered by rising onto her toes and pressing her hand against his chest, where Eric's presence beat strong beneath the king's heart. The throne hall erupted, not in the polished applause of nobles, but in the howls of living wolves and the silent blaze of the dead. Above them, the moon broke through the storm clouds, and every grave flame burned brighter. Peace did not arrive all at once, but it arrived with work. Morden lived long enough to stand trial before every pack he had manipulated. He tried to justify himself until the dead of his own bloodline appeared and turned their backs on him. That broke him more than sentencing. He was not executed. Liora chose a punishment older than death. He was sent to the deepest archive beneath the Moon Temple, stripped of title, guarded by the spirits he had tried to silence, and ordered to record every erased name until his hand failed or his heart did. Thorn testified for 23 days, naming conspirators, roots, payments, rituals, and graves. When his testimony ended, he knelt before Kael and offered his life again. Kael looked to Liora, then to Eric. "No," the king said, "you will command no soldiers. You will hold no blade. You will spend your years rebuilding the burial grounds your obedience filled." Thorn bowed his head and wept once, silently, which did not absolve him, but began the punishment of remembering. Seraphine's fate was quieter. Her house fell, its lands divided among the families it had ruined. She came to Liora one winter morning in the Moon Temple courtyard, wearing plain gray for the first time in her life. No jewels, no ladies, no practiced tears. "I hated you because you were everything I was taught to fear," she said. Liora waited. Seraphine swallowed. "And because he looked at you as if truth had entered the room, and I knew beauty could not compete with that." It was the first honest thing she had ever said. Liora did not embrace her. Some wounds did not require performance to heal. "Then become someone who does not need fear to stand," she said. Seraphine left Ravengard for the eastern monasteries, where fallen nobles served among war widows and orphaned cubs. Whether redemption found her, Liora did not know, but the kingdom no longer bent around her jealousy. Months passed. The burial grounds of Moonfall were restored as sacred land, not shameful necessity. Merrin became High Keeper of the Rites and complained loudly that palaces had too many stairs. Children born without early wolf signs were no longer mocked, for the kingdom had learned that power did not always announce itself in expected forms. The Moon Temple rewrote its teachings. Alpha law changed. No council could sever wolf from soul. No Luna could be chosen by bloodline alone. No dead warrior could be buried without name or witness. Liora traveled from pack to pack with Kael at her side, hearing the dead, settling old crimes, returning stolen histories. Some feared her still. She accepted that. Sacred things were not always comfortable. Her love with Kael grew not like a court ballad, but like a forest after fire. Slowly, stubbornly, with roots beneath the ash. He learned to laugh, though rarely in public and often only when she insulted his royal stubbornness. She learned to accept warmth without searching for the knife beneath it. He still woke some nights reaching for a wolf he feared losing again, and she would place her hand over his heart until Eric's presence steadied. She still dreamed of graves opening beneath her feet, and he would hold her without asking her to be less haunted. Their bond did not erase pain. It gave pain somewhere to go. 1 year after the night of rejection, the court gathered again in the throne hall for the Moon Remembrance, a new rite honoring every wolf lost to war, betrayal, or time. Liora stood where she had once knelt in humiliation. The marble had been repaired but not replaced. The crack from the night Eric first bowed remained, filled now with silver. Kael approached beside her, carrying no crown. "Do you ever wish it had happened differently?" he asked quietly. Liora looked at the hall, at the nobles who now lowered their heads in respect, at the spectral wolves resting in moonlit corners, at Merrin scolding a young priest for misplacing burial salt. "Yes," she said. His face tightened with old guilt. She touched his hand. "I wish the child I was had known she was not a curse." Kael closed his fingers around hers. "So do I." She leaned against him just enough for the court not to see, but for him to feel. "But if I had never been sent to the graves, I would not have heard the dead. If I had never been rejected, the court would not have seen them bow. Pain is not destiny, Kael, but sometimes destiny uses what pain leaves behind." He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, right there before the court, with no concern for whispers. "Then, let us build a kingdom, where fewer children need pain to discover who they are." Liora smiled, and the grave crown shimmered faintly above her brow. A worthy vow for an Alpha King. As the ceremony began, the great doors opened to admit a procession of orphaned wolf cubs from the border packs, children of the war Garen and Morden had engineered. They walked shyly beneath banners of black and silver, each carrying a small lantern. One little girl stopped before Liora, staring with wide eyes. She had ash-dark hair, bare feet, and no visible wolf mark. The nobles held their breath, perhaps remembering another girl, another night. The child lifted her lantern and whispered, "They said I should give this to the queen who smells like the moon after a funeral." A ripple of discomfort moved through the adults, but Liora knelt, bringing herself eye level with the child. "And were you afraid?" The girl shook her head. "No. Funerals mean someone loved you enough to say goodbye." Elara's throat tightened. She accepted the lantern. Behind the child, a faint spectral wolf cub appeared, wagging its translucent tail. The little girl did not see it, but Liora did. So did Kael. Their eyes met over the child's head, and something like wonder passed between them. The moon gravekeeper line was not as dead as anyone had believed. Perhaps power, like truth, could survive in hidden places until the world became ready to listen. That night, after the court dispersed and the last lantern floated into the sky, Liora and Kael stood alone on the balcony, overlooking Ravengard. Snow fell over the city, softening towers, graves, roofs, and roads under the same pale hush. Eric lay at their feet in spectral form, no longer restless, no longer wounded, simply present. Liora leaned against the stone rail. "The first time I entered this palace, I thought it would swallow me." Kael stood beside her, his shoulder warm against hers. "It tried. So did you." He exhaled, accepting the wound without flinching. "I did." She looked at him. "And now?" He turned fully, moonlight catching the gold in his eyes. "Now I know better than to reject the thing my soul recognizes before my pride understands." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle, almost reverent. "Now I know death bowed to you because life had failed to honor you." Liora closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words settle into the places old insults had lived. Then she smiled faintly. "Careful, Your Majesty. That almost sounded poetic. I am told queens inspire dangerous habits." "Queens?" "Grave queens," he said, drawing her closer. "Moon queens. Lost queens found in ash. I will use every title until one makes you smile without sadness." She looked up at him, this feared king who had become not less powerful by kneeling, but greater. This man whose wolf had bowed before her, before his heart, knew how. This mate she had chosen not because destiny demanded it, but because he had learned to choose her freedom first. "Liora," she said. He stilled. "Use my name." His expression softened in a way the court would never see. "Liora," he whispered, and kissed her beneath the falling snow while the dead wolves of Ravengard kept peaceful watch. Far below, in the restored burial grounds, the graves glowed faintly under moonlight, not with unrest, but remembrance. The kingdom would tell the story for generations. How the Alpha King rejected the girl who smelled like death. How his dead wolf bowed to her. How the grave girl became the moon gravekeeper queen. And how the throne learned at last that the dead do not haunt the living out of hatred. They rise when truth has been buried too long. They kneel when the one who can carry it finally comes home.